Cake. A Sweet Piece of Cake by The Descendant. Chapter 11. Take a Letter. When constructing a gingerbread house, the most proficient bakery artisans like our cakes suggest the following piece of advice. Remember that how you decorate the exterior of the house is as important as how well you build the interior. It seems like an extraordinary thing to say. It seems to contradict all that we have learned about our lives, about valuing what is within more than the superficial things on top. That, however, makes the assumption that the decorations upon a gingerbread house are merely paltry additions that assumes they do not truly matter. That is incorrect. The decorations upon a gingerbread house tell us how much care is put into it. Like a relationship, it must be adorned, allowed to grow, or it will just sit empty and flake away under the sun. It would have been nice to say that this thought was on Cupcake's mind as she worked to prepare the surface of the gingerbread house for decoration, as she and Carrot got ready to adorn it with treats and sweets. Instead, all that was really on her mind was the single dollop of frosting that sat upon his nose, and how very much she would like to leap across the table and lick it off him with long, slow movements. Still, something inside her told her to desist. So, as they worked the house, she simply stood there with the tube in her mouth, smiling a wicked smile and pondering how she eventually was going to get it off of him. She would have to, because she knew he would not remove it himself. He would not remove it because she had laid it there as a sign of her affection. He was content to let it sit there until the waters of the well washed it off of him, if need be. The blind bowl was probably unnecessary for a taste test, but as she wrapped it around his eyes and gave it a small tug with her teeth, he most certainly did not mind. Under his tutelage, Cupcake was becoming more and more proficient as a baker. As their second spring together went on and on, it quickly became an amazing time. Time for them to both finally settle into the roles of my other. As they worked together, she had grown and learned, wanting her take on these new responsibilities and witnessing her working toward being a bigger part of the bakery that made Carrot very happy. She had been a good baker to begin with, but as he taught her everything he knew, she had only grown. Though it was clear that he would still be the primary baker, knowing that she was there to aid him gave him strength. Around his bakery had come alive, filled with the touch of a mare who no longer felt the need to hide. Soon it was vibrant and welling with color. The name was still pretty bad. He grimaced as he thought about that. He would need a new name soon, but the thought disappeared as her hoof dropped from his, and a set of many wonderful things caught in his nose. He lifted his hoof and immediately winced as it banged against the countertop. "Oh, sorry," she said, running her foreleg against where he had bumped it. "Here, let me get them for you." He sensed her near and knew that she had grabbed up one of the treats she had made. She was now nearby, holding it to him in her mouth. He leaned to her and took a bite. Apple strudel," he said, instantly able to guess what she had made. Her little glass showed that he had been correct. Her hoof was to his again, as he led him to the next tray. With that, he took a bite of her next creation, quickly guessing as he looked on. "Ah, eclair," he answered, her giggles and the touch of her cheek being his reward. So down the countertop they moved, Cupcake becoming confident as they went, Carrot more proud and happy for her. A dozen treats and pastries of all varieties had been there. Her growing talents had made it easily identifiable. All too soon the last treat was reached. "Well," she said with a little sigh, "that's the end of that then." Inside an instant she felt the familiar touch of his lips to hers. It was welcome, but not expected. As he raised his head, the blindfold still covered his eyes. He began to pondering. Sugar plum," he said before lowering his head again. Her smile grew as he touched his lips to hers once more, held in there as her taste flowed to him. "Uh-huh, just a snap," he said without raising his head from her, moving down her neck and then planting a kiss along it as he slowly lifted his head. She leaned into it, chuckled as she realized the purpose of his game. Once more he met her lips, let them remain there for a moment, then once more moved down her neck, let a trail of kisses remain behind. "Honey bun," he whispered into her ear as he moved to her other side, as she felt the soft, wet, warm pat of his lips across her cheek, neck, and chest. As happy sounds began to lift from the kitchen, an older stallion in a crumple stood by the cash register in the bakery showroom. He realized that his entrance had somehow gone unnoticed. Feeling a little agitated that he had been left standing there, he went to where the sounds emanated to seek the shopkeepers. Upon witnessing the pleasant scene that developed behind the kitchen, he quickly turned around, once more thankfully unnoticed, and made for the register. There he left what he assumed was the proper piece for a pie, and a touch more, just to be safe. The blushing stallion then walked away as quietly as he could, as the sounds that lifted from the kitchen became rather more immodest in nature. As he left with his pie, did the two young ponies the favor, turning the sign upon the door to close. The old pony stared at the sign above the door, the one that read, "Carrot Cakes Bakery Company, LLC Incorporated." Having met the pair long before and in scenes less compromising, he wondered when the Lincoln stallion was going to add her to the sign. Only seemed proper, he thought as he went into the street, with how well the two fit together like that. Although Carrot's thoughts were elsewhere at the moment, it would have made the old pony happy to know that Carrot had been thinking along very similar lines. Thin, fat, and angry. Corey preferred the names he had given the three colts. Inside his thoughts he addressed them as much. A month and those many weeks had passed since the last time the three sat before him. Much has changed in the world of the old stallion since they had visited the office, since he had made the proposal. At that time, Corey had been able to ponder many great things. As he had, a lot of what he believed about the way of the world had been called into question. "So," he said while looking them all over, each seeing that the finest edges had come off his sharp stare. "Most of them told us to take you up on your offer. They're all yours, apart from this one. Carrot Cakes Bakery Company, LLC, Incorporated." The three colts looked at the name over and then peered at one another with small surprise. They could not imagine the circumstances that would make any pony want to stay with Corey, but, well, there it was in black and white. Offer refused with thanks. It simply added to the awkwardness that hung around the room. The presence of a fifth pony making things in the small room seem thick with breath and moisture. "Well," laughed the thin colt as he tried to force some conversation into the room. Can't say I take a bunch of the business of that one, eh?" "Nothing wrong with him," breathed Corey, drawing all the oxygen out of the room as his voice rumbled around the walls. Silence hung there for a moment, and the colts all looked at one another, wondered who would be the one to mention the obvious. The angry colt volunteered quickly. "If that's the case," said the angry one with visible malice, "then you owe us a refund on the loan. 467 bits, rolled the voice of Corey. "My secretary will write you a check." "Well, we'll just be sure that's the correct amount first," said the angry one, eyeing him. "It's the right amount. We had a deal." "Well, we like to be accurate," answered the angry colt. His smile grew as he got one last chance to level his eyes upon Corey, to have some small satisfaction of knowing he had gotten something out of him. His smile faded as Corey stood and glared down over the colt who had suddenly launched. his partners going acid as the massive stallion began to swear. Corey reached for piles of papers atop the nearby cabinet. He tossed it before the angry cult. "You calling me a liar, cult? It's all right there on your bucket paste, damn your coat. You wanna know what a lie is, cult? Let me tell you about your father and..." began as spitting Corey as his eyes started to go red. At once, the touch of a soft hoof to his drew him down, made him stutter to a stop. "There," said Wishing Well, lifting herself slightly forward in her wheelchair. Around the small room, the 5 ponies sat in the musty heat of the late spring day as Corey ran his hoof across his eyes and slowly regained his composure. A lot had changed in the world of Corey those few weeks. Now he felt as though maybe, just maybe, he could escape the wrath. Find a way to live that didn't end with him having a stroke or a heart attack. He looked back up to the cults. He gazed out over the 3 figures that stood still, each looking up to him. He gently pushed the paper toward the angry cult. "It's all there on the page," he said while he sat down, taking Wishing Well's hose into his own. "It's the same rate, same indexes that we talked about more than a month ago. We had a deal, but if you don't trust me, we'll take it." The angry cults moved side to side. Corey remembered himself making the same movements when Carrot stood before him, the question of trust growing within him. For the briefest of moments, Corey wondered if this cult was on the same path he had been, if he had grown up not trusting, if he had grown up being fearful. That fear dissipated as the cult looked back up to him and raised his hoof. "No, sir, we trust you. The number sounds about right." "Sounds right," spoke the cult. Corey stood there and leaned across the table. He shook the hoof of the angry cult and saw a look of sublime relief grow across the 3. Inside minutes, he was showing them to the door, the cult saying their goodbyes to Wishing Well as they raised themselves up from the crowded little office. As he turned to leave, the angry cult felt Corey's hoof upon his shoulder. The cult startled, jumped, and turned with the expectation of seeing the wrathful fate of Corey staring upon him. Instead, he found the older stallion looking to the floor. As Corey lifted his head, he looked at the angry cult with something approaching supplication. Would you tell your father hello for me?" asked Corey as he looked to the cult. "And I mean that, cordially, you know." The angry cult listened. His partner spoke with the secretary. "Oh yes," she answered. "He is happier these days. Today's especially. He brought Wishing Well over here to receive an inquiry." The thin one and the fat one did their best to pry, but the third cult, the one who had formerly seemed angry, he simply looked around the room. The light came in through the large window, and the goldfish swam with happy flicks through the bowl. "He wants me to greet Dad for him," he whispered to himself, feeling decades of pent-up anger drifting out of him. "Well, don't tell anyone I said so," said Paperclip, handing him the check, looking back toward the closed door. "But the nicest young stallion asked him both to come here this morning. He brought me a treat as he always does, and then he asked me to wish him luck." She smiled in mischievous grin. "He asked them if they would be all right with him asking their youngest daughter to marry him. It's a touch old-fashioned, but isn't it so romantic?" Carrot Cake stood there before the door to the familiar mansion, his saddlebag sitting around him. As it came open, the figure of the butler, serving tray, appeared blinking in the morning light. As his eyes adjusted, a smile grew on his face as he recognized the caller.
"Young Mr. Cake, it's good to see you again,"
said the butler as he raised his hoof greeting. Carrot smiled. part of him still at odds with the funny sensation that being called Mister brought with it. "It's not very nice to see you two, Trey. Would Miss Script be available by any chance?" he asked.
"Certainly, sir,"
intoned Serving Trey.
"If you should like to follow me, I shall announce you."
Together they went through the large hallway and public room to a small study. Carrot flipped around the fact that he was being called a sir a few times. Proper Pony stared down from the dark paintings on the wall. As they approached the study, Serving Tray began to announce him. Before he had a chance, the figure of Ivory was already there at the door. Serving Tray went off, slightly disappointed at being kept from one of the small duties he had enjoyed. As Ivory gave Carrot a small welcome hug, the two turned back to the study. "And what brings you here to my little warren, Carrot?" she asked, clearing a space in an overstuffed chair for him. "Well, if you're not too busy, I'm not interrupting, am I?" said Carrot as he looked at the small mountain of papers and wastebasket of dull quills. "I most certainly am busy, and I'm very, very happy you're interrupted. What can I do for you?" Carrot replied to her with a smile of his own. Lowering his saddlebags to the floor, he pulled out some sheets of paper. Some crumpled papers, some wads of paper that went to the floor and bounced around. "I have this writing project. One that's not going too well, Ivory. And I was hoping you might help," he asked as he watched her reach from his abortive attempts. When he saw what he was attempting to write, she looked up, ran her eyes across more of the pages. Carrot never heard Ivory make noises like that before. She jumped to him. He caught up to her in another hug, this one frenzied and filled with squeals of joy. As though she were embarrassed, she asked to excuse herself, leaving Carrot alone in the room. As she went, she literally skipped like a filly in the schoolyard. That's a yes, right?" he asked the room in general. Nearby, some more of her writing slid off a mountain of books. "Okay, good," he answered himself, smiling as he did so. Serving Tray had turned back down the hallway, presuming that enough time had elapsed to ask if there was anything that they would like to be brought to them. Upon seeing his young mistress standing against the wall with her hose to her face, he immediately trotted forward in alarm.
Miss Ivory, are you well?"
he asked with concern near the surface. Ivory lowered her hooves and looked up to him with a massive smile. At the same time, great wet tears rolled down her face. She had done it! They had done it! All three of them! Cupcake was safe, the plan had worked, and now the cementing of that work was playing out before her. Her best friend would be so happy, and she would be so happy for them. She was already so happy. "Yes, I'm quite all right. Everything is wonderful. So very wonderful. Could you please bring us some ice water, Tray, and perhaps something bubbly as well?" Do I look all right? Is my being okay?" asked Cheesecake as she hovered beneath the lamppost. Carrot had been thinking about the lamppost. For so long, this had been the border of his world. How reaching this lamppost might as well have been the attaining of the edge of the unknown world. Today, he was bringing his mother to meet two ponies who had inhabited a house that he had once only beheld from here. From this distance, outpost of his knowledge. Today, if all went well, he would open a new chapter in the journal of his journey with the mare who now stood with him. Cupcake moved to answer the questions that his mother floated out over them in her inferior tones. "You look wonderful, Cheesecake," answered Cupcake as she ran her hoof over the foreleg of the older mare. "I'm sure Mama and Daddy and yourself will get along wonderfully. I know it." Oh, I hope so," said the thin older mare. "I don't want to embarrass either of you. Please, tell me if I'm doing something wrong." Together, the three went up the sidewalk and to the gate. As they approached the house, Carrot could see the figure of Quarry, massive and imposing as ever. He stood behind Wishing Well as the mare sat in her wheelchair. the two making a proper portrait of how proper ponies should arrange themselves to meet some pony new. Carrot heard his mother make a noise. At once, he stopped and turned to her. Her ears were back, her hood once more raised as though in surprise. "No," she whispered under her breath, her head giving a small shake. It can't be." "Mom, what?" he began, reacting to her expressions as they grew on her. His head flew up to the porch, and saw Corey staring on perplexed. Saw wishing well. Cupcake's mother stood. "Taste cake," floated the voice of the frail mare, wafting out and over the lawn and garden. "Wishing well?" replied his mother as her ears fully came up. Oh, Celestia, cheesecake, cheesecake!" called out Wessingwell in the loudest voice Carrie had ever heard her use. The loudest that Cupcake had heard her mother use in years. As Carrot and Cupcake watched, their mouths hanging open in surprise, Cheesecake took off on a trot. Soon as he was galloping, her host sounding out in solid wax upon the stairs. Corey joined the two and looking on in aghast as Cheesecake and Wishingwell embraced each other, the two crying out loud in happiness as big wet tears ran down their faces, their heads laid upon the withers of each other. "Oh, it's been forever! Oh, Cheesy, how I missed you!" called Wishingwell, her voice already starting to strain under her efforts. Wishy-washy, wishy-washy, 25 years or more. Oh, Celestia, wishy-washy, replied Cheesecake as she rocked the frail mare gently. More than 20 years ago, loud words had sounded out in a dance studio that doubled on as an apartment that these two mares had shared. Whatever the context of that conversation, whatever had separated, that flew away as the two stood there in the sunlight of the full spring, as the delicate mare hovered above her wheelchair. Her tears washed over the thin, withdrawn man who carried her. With that, an old friendship was reborn, as the sounds of a spring morning sat across the porch. "Dear Princess Celestia, today I learned that age does not matter when reuniting old friends." Inside the house, a small buffet of sorts had been set out. As Carrot gazed over the selection, his eyes kept going to the door. He listened as the conversation in the great vast living room of the house Corey had built drew on and on. Soon the familiar sounds of girl talk began to lift from within. Soon Corey joined him, the stallion retreating as a refugee from the presence and the persistence of such a conversation. Carrot wished that he had become more comfortable around Corey, that he could say that now he was within the confidence of the stallion. He could not. There still seemed to be a sort of wall there, one that he was allowed to cross, but not without being measured against. Carrot sighed, and looked upon the fixings for a daily in silence. He wondered if he wanted mustard. As he did, he made room for Corey. The stallion gave a sigh, apparently distraught at the non-presence of the last few slices of cheese he wanted.
"You eat the last of the cheese on me, Cake?"
asked the stallion with a toss of his head. "No, sir. I'm pretty sure it was a little cold out there."
"Meh,"
answered Corey, moving away.
"I can cut up some more."
Carrot gave another sigh, knew that there was always going to be a distance between them. Corey still called him Cake, but then again, he couldn't bring himself to call Corey anything but Sir. There was something that was not clicking between them. Then again, Corey had lashed him with a whip. That's usually a stumbling block to any sort of relationship. Wishingwell liked him well enough, so he had patted his foreleg and called him such a nice colt. That was more than anything he could have asked for. His eyes went to the door once more.
"You expecting some pony, Cake?"
asked Corey as he stared at him from the icebox. A a large block of cheese on his hoof. "Yes, sir," asked Carrot, looking back to the door. A knock prophetically sounded out from the entryway. Corey looked down to Carrot and then to the door. With large, huge, powerful steps, he crossed out of the kitchen and toward the entryway. He looked up to Carrot and then turned his head. He opened the door. Corey blinked in the sun and looked over at the familiar face of Ivory.
Oh! Oh, hello there, Miss Ivory. Come on in.
Said that stallion, looking to Carrot. Soon, Ivory turned to him with a slight look upon her face. "Carrot," she said, giving him a quick embrace. "Tell me, how did the recipe come out?" "It mixed together quite well," he answered, watching the smile spreading across her face. "It mixed." Ivory gave him another quick hug, sliding something among his hose where his sandwich stood, then was off into the living room, her own saddlebag hanging upon her as her hose sounded across the wooden floor. Carrot and Quarry waited until the sounds of introductions had begun to die down before returning to the living room.
Cake?
Carrot looked up to see Quarry looking at him. He saw something of an understanding growing in the older stallion. It had been a code. He knew. Carrot stared back up to him, and to Quarry's surprise, Carrot tried to give him a hug.
"Oh, the well,"
Quarry said with a sound of exasperation, collecting the smaller stallion for a quick embrace as the knowledge of what was about to happen grew upon him. With a toss of his head, Quarry nodded and ushered the young stallion into the living room. To Carrot's happiness, Cupcake came to sit beside him as soon as he entered. He laid some of the things he had grabbed from the buffet before her. 4 other mares, Cheesecake, Ivory, Ruby, and Wishing Well, watched Cupcake's nieces and nephews practice lines from a school play. Carrot lifted his eyes to Ivory, caught hers aside a glance. A slight nod was his reply. He tried to act casual, sipping at the cup awkwardly as it laid upon the floor. "Oh, Cupcake," spoke Ivory, "I received a letter for you. It seems it came to me by accident. I brought it with me." "Huh?" replied Cupcake as she watched her nieces and nephews take a seat. "Imagine that." Silence hovered over the room. May I have it, Ive?" "Of course," replied Ivory, stopping to take a sip of tea. "I've hidden it somewhere in this room." What?" asked Cupcake as he stood and trotted to where Ivory sat impassively. "Now come now, Ive, why did you have to go and do something like that?" she asked, her tone slightly hurt. "Oh, don't be like that, Cubby. Come on now, try and find it. Let's play hot or cold." Giggled Ivory as she stared up at the annoyed Cupcake, the mare pounding with one hoof on the floor. She began to crisscross the room, listening to Ivory for hints. "No, cold. Even colder, Cuppy. Ah, that way is warmer. Now why would you come back this way? You're cold again," spoke Ivory while Cupcake's nieces and nephews cheered her on. Soon the room was evenly divided between those trying to help her and those laughing at the spectacle. "Oh, Ivory, it's too cold," she said as she stood before the fireplace, her hose dancing in frustration. "If you're going to be that way, then you can keep the letter." She went back to her pillow in a huff. Cupcake laid down next to Carrot and leaned into him. He laid his head upon her, taking up some of her frustration. He tried to keep from giggling as the game came to an end. "Hot." "What?" asked Cupcake as she raised her head to look at Ivory. "Hot, Cuppy. You're hot. You're almost upon it," answered Ivory with a wide smile. Cupcake looked at Carrot, a look of bewilderment hanging over her. She stood and pressed her nose to his, the act eliciting a faint giggles from her nieces. "Very hot," answered Cupcake from the far side of the room, the other adults going quiet. Cupcake nuzzled Carrot's foreleg. Before Ivory could even answer, she had moved to his hoof. On fire, Cuppy, answered Ivory, her voice going softer. I'm so happy that you found it. So very happy you Cupcake. Carrot lifted his hoof, removed the charger from his plate, revealing where Ivory had hidden the letter when they had spoken the passwords in the kitchen. Cupcake looked down upon the letter at the silver plate, saw the exquisite envelope. She moved to lift it, but Carrot moved first. Carefully and tenderly, he opened it, breaking the wax seal gently so much that it remained as possible. With that, he lifted it with his teeth, motioned for her to take the envelope, much like they had once upon a mattress in a bakery in the city beyond. Cupcake stood with the envelope in her mouth. Soon what was transpiring began to register with her. At once, Carrot had laid the letter before him. With that, he asked for her hoof, raising to meet hers. A string of causality wrapped around them, bound them to one another. As he did, the other ponies in the room looked on in wonder. Carrot sat up and looked into the rose-colored eyes that he had first fallen into a year ago. Even now they grew moist, her understanding of what he was doing growing in her. Even as they began to hide the cheeks that were rising in a broad smile, those eyes still called to him, as they would for decades if she would let him. To Miss Cupcake, he began from Carrot Cake. Carrot cleared his voice, lifted his hoof to hers once more. A proposal for marriage. The envelope dropped out of Cupcake's mouth. I've never been happier than during this last year. Than during the time you had been in my life. He felt her sharp breath begin. Felt her anticipation growing through the small connection that ran through her hooves. You added so much to my life. Supported me. Given me strength. Without breaking the connection between him. Without taking her hoof out of his. She ran her face over her foreleg. Wiped away the tears that were forming. Giving me reason to believe in myself. Because you believe in me. She stopped trying to hide the tears. Just looked down to him as he read the letter. Cupcake's cheeks were hurting. Her smile so strong that it consumed her. Even as she cried, she still set eyes on him. This gangly colt. The stallion in his underbite. This wonderful stallion that made her so happy. I will work to make you happy. Do all I can to show how much I love you every day. Never stop trying to show you how much you mean to me. Yes, she said, her voice just above the whisper. Carrot jumped a little. He was not done yet. He hadn't even reached the question. In all things, our fear, our pain, our hope, you'll be able to find shelter in me. And I'll do everything I can to keep you safe and... Yes! She said again, her voice louder and more certain. He laughed a little. He had not even reached the question. Was he allowed to say that before he even asked it? He pressed on and looked up to her, looking into her beautiful eyes. In all things, you'll be my partner and my equal, and never will I demount or demean you. I love you, Cupcake, and I ask you, please, will you... Yes! Yes, Carrot! She cried as she leapt into him, bowling over him and upon the pillows where they had been seated, her hips once upon his. As the applause of a half-dozen hoes across the room reached them, this is where they stayed. Slowly, she lifted her head as her nieces giggled. Her nephew continued to voice the opinion of all little boys, namely, that what was this trying was gross, and that he would not put it up with it much longer. As rose-colored eyes stared down at him, Carrot could not help but hope that the little colt would someday have ample reason to change his opinion. Marry me? Cupcake concluded as he laid his hoof beside her face. Yes, she whispered once more, touching her hoof to his. As the last happy tear fell from her face, she lowered herself again, laying her lips to his once more. Despite the protests and giggles of the onlookers as they stayed that way for a great long while, at least until the more romantically inclined population of the room demanded to congratulate the two lovers. And in case you people are wondering, no, we're not done yet. We still got some more.